This video will describe how to create a summary of findings table in the GRADEpro GDT based on a Cochrane review that was produced using Review Manager, also known as RevMan. It is also possible to create tables by entering information directly into GRADEpro, and we have other videos showing how to do this. The link is shown at the bottom of this screen. Over the course of this video, I will introduce you to the GRADEpro GDT website. I will show you how to create a summary of findings table such as this. The summary of findings table is basically a table which provides a brief summary of the results of a systematic review. It shows the evidence for one comparison. In this case, what are the effects of self-management versus usual care for patients with COPD, and the results for up to 7 outcomes. Specifically, I will show you how to import data from a RevMan file, set up the summary of findings table, organize outcomes, present evidence for dichotomous outcomes, continuous outcomes, and narrative outcomes, and enter the certainty of evidence using grade with footnotes. Finally, once I finish the table, I will show you how to import your data from the GRADEpro GDT back into Review Manager. Let's start. The website for the GRADEpro GDT software is www.gradepro.org. I've already created an account in GRADEpro and will log in. When entering GRADEpro for the first time, there will not be any projects listed. As such, it will be necessary to start a new one. But before I do that, I'll click on the Learn and Support tab. Here I can access online tutorials, walkthroughs, the Grade Handbook, and more. These are accessible at any time. Now I will click on Start New and choose Summary of Findings Table. In terms of naming my project, I will call it Self-Management and COPD, and then select Create Project. There will be a small wait time as the project prepares. At this point, I can import my RevMan file for my review of self-management and COPD. I have created the file in RevMan by checking out of Archie and saving a copy to my computer. Note that I should have all of my analyses completed before importing the data from RevMan. So I will click Import Questions, choose File, and then select my respective RevMan file. Note that this is from a pre-selected folder on my own computer. The folder on your own computer may be different. After clicking Open, you'll see that it will ask me which questions I want to import. Since I only have 2, I will select both and then click Import. You'll see that any comparisons and outcomes that had a meta-analyses were pulled in from RevMan. Outcomes that have other data in a table or only narrative descriptions in RevMan will not be imported, but you can add them yourself later. So on this screen, you will see all of the comparisons that were in your review. In this case, the 2 comparisons that came out of the meta-analyses were a comparison for self-management versus control and self-management versus written information. In your review, you will need to separate the summary of findings table for each comparison, but I will start with the summary of findings table for self-management versus control. In order to do that, I will just click this comparison. If I scroll down, you will see that all of my outcomes in the meta-analyses have been listed, and all of the numbers from the RevMan file have automatically been pulled in. First, we will start with the top part of the summary of findings table. We will need to fix or enter this data into GRADEpro. The next step is to organize the outcomes. Remember that all of the outcomes had a meta-analyses and were imported. So I may need to delete some, and I may also want to add some that did not have a meta-analysis. As an author, I should decide about the most important outcomes to include in my table. This should be based on the most important outcomes identified at the protocol stage of the review, and should include at least 1 measure of adverse effects. No more than 7 outcomes are recommended to include in one summary of findings table. So, as we move to our own table, I've decided that I want to include the score for total quality of life. I do want the score about breathing difficulties. However, I do not want the score about antibiotic use. So I will click on the far right-hand side on the Edit button and then click the trash can to delete the outcome. As we move farther down to our next outcome, we have decided that we do want the outcome for respiratory hospital admission, and we do want to keep the next three. Lung function, which I know is a surrogate outcome and not very important to patients to see what their percent volume is, I will delete as well. At this stage, I know that I am missing an outcome that did not have a meta-analysis in my review, but was summarized narratively and is important to include in the table. So for this, I will have to manually add the outcome. I will go to the bottom of the screen and select Add Outcome. I choose Narrative Outcome. At this point, GRADEpro has added it to the bottom of the table with no title yet. I can click on the field for now and just enter number of exacerbations. Once I've entered that information, I can click Apply. I will talk more about filling out this outcome later in the video. I would, however, like to put this outcome third in my table, so I will click Edit again and click on these arrows and change my position to 3. My list of outcomes is now organized, and you will notice that number of exacerbations has moved to the 3rd slot. Let's go into one of our outcomes and have a closer look. Let's start with the respiratory-related hospital admissions outcome, which is dichotomous. One of the key features of the summary of findings table is to make it in plain language, so I should ensure that the outcome is described well. For example, you might wish to avoid acronyms. I am happy with the way it is written, but I want to provide the follow-up time, so I will click on the field and then type in its range of follow-up. In these studies, it was a range of 3 months to 12 months. I have typed that in and I am happy with my selection. So now I can click Apply. Now I can take a look at the rest of the data for that outcome. Remember, this was all imported from the RevMan file. There was a meta-analysis for hospital admissions. From the meta-analysis, the odds ratio was 0.64 with confidence intervals of 0.47 to 0.89. There were 8 studies, and in total there were 528 people in the intervention groups and 438 in the control groups, which is a total of 966 people. In GRADEpro, you can see that these numbers were added into the column for number of participants and studies. But what I need to do is enter in the type of studies. So I will click on that cell, and for study design, I will select randomized control trials. Note that if you need to change any of the numbers, you can do that here as well. Here is the odds ratio from the forest plot of 0.64. Because it is often difficult for readers to interpret the odds ratios and risk ratios, the summary of findings table shows what happens to people in absolute terms to the left. So what happens to people with usual care, which is shown in this column, and people with self-management, which is shown in this column? As an author, you need to decide which baseline risk or risk in the usual care group you will show in the table. You can click on the cell for usual care. GRADEpro has simply calculated the average percentage of people who had an admission across your included studies using the total number of people who had the event, which is in this case 112, by the total number of people who had the usual care from the forest plot, which is 438. This shows the average as the study population value. It also presents the median. That is, all of your individual included studies, the median value of the event rates in the individual usual care groups. It presents this as the moderate risk value. It calculated all of this from the data in your forest plot. The average is 112 divided by 438. The median uses the control event rates from all of the included studies to calculate the median. If you were happy with these values as a representation of your usual care population, you would usually choose one, the median or the average, but not both of these values to represent on your summary findings table. So you should click on one of these boxes and deselect the one you prefer not to use. But it is up to you what baseline risk you show. You could show an average risk or a median risk across your included studies. You can show a baseline risk from a source outside your review, such as a large representative non-randomized studies, or you could show a range of risk. If we look at our forest plot and look at the studies, you'll see that there was a broad range of baseline risk. So we decided to present more than one value for our baseline or usual care risk. The Cootless Bee study had a baseline risk of 2 out of 25, which was 8%. The Bourbeau study had 48 out of 95, or approximately 50% of people, which were admitted to the hospital with usual care. These are quite different. We decided to use these as the lowest and highest values respectively from the studies. So, at the usual care cell, I'll unclick showing the calculated average from the control groups. I will also unclick the median risk. I'll click on low risk and put in a value of 10%, which was taken from the Cootless study. Additionally, I will also click on high risk and enter 50%, which was taken from the Bourbeau study. Also important is to indicate where the baseline risk came from, so I will attach a footnote to the low and high risk. First, I will click on low, and then I will select explanations. For this particular footnote, I will enter this explanation. Then I can click Save, and I can exit this menu. I will also attach the same footnote to the high risk by right-clicking on high, selecting explanations, and since I have already entered the same explanation, I can just select it here. Then I can exit this menu. After closing our menu, you should be aware of three things. Firstly, we can now see the low and high risk in our respiratory-related hospital admissions outcome. Secondly, our footnotes, which we entered for low and high risk, can be seen here. And lastly, the table is currently showing absolute numbers out of 1,000. In this case, because my event rates are so high, I'm going to change to show out of 100 instead. So once again, I'll click on my usual care cell, and here I can change per 1,000 to per 100. After selecting Apply, the GDT will give you the option to apply this change to the entire summary findings table. In this case, we want to do this, so we can select Yes. You'll see that GRADEpro has automatically calculated the event rate in people who have taken a self-management program. In this case, approximately 10 out of 100 people in the low-risk population would have an admission to the hospital if they didn't take the self-management program. And 7 out of 100 would be admitted if they took the program. 7 was calculated by taking the odds ratio and converting it to a relative risk, and then multiplying that number by 10 people out of 100. A set of numbers has also been calculated for the high-risk group. In this case, it's 50 per 100 and 39 per 100. Now I need to enter the quality or certainty of evidence into the quality column. We have separate modules about how to grade outcomes using the GRADE approach, and detailed online modules about each grade domain to assess the certainty of evidence. These can be found at cebgrade.mcmaster.cea, which should be on your screen now. I will not describe this in detail here, but I will simply show you how to enter in your assessment of evidence. I need to let readers know how confident I am in the odds ratio from the meta-analyses. So I'll click on this cell and enter in the quality of evidence. Here you can see all of the grade domains. For each domain, I need to say whether there was no concern, serious concern, or very serious concern. In this case, for risk of bias, the risk of bias in the studies was low, so I can mark as not serious. Again, be aware that I can also grade this as serious or very serious if it was applicable. If I need help to understand the domain, I can right-click and then click on Help. As you can see, some information has been provided. For inconsistency, I will also say that it was not serious. However, for indirectness, there were some issues with whether the studies that contributed to the meta-analysis were representative of the population. So, I will mark it as serious. Because I marked it as serious, I will need to provide an explanation for my decision. To add an explanation, I can right-click on the criteria name and then select Explanation. You will notice that previous explanations that we've provided elsewhere in the Summary of Findings table are appearing. Because we are providing a new explanation, I will select Add Explanation. In this case, I want to say that 2 studies with very severe COPD patients weighted heavily in the meta-analysis. Therefore, there is some uncertainty with the applicability of the effect to all risk groups. I have entered this, so I can click Save and then exit the menu. Now back to the rest of the grade assessment. All of the domains were not serious. Note that the final 3 domains on this list do not apply to randomized trials and should only be completed if you're presenting data from non-randomized studies. Once I'm finished, I can apply. You'll notice that the Summary of Findings table, GRADEpro has filled in the quality of evidence. In this case, it is moderate because we had 1 serious rating. A quick note about explanations in general are that in addition to judgments about quality assessment, explanations can be added to any cell in the table. For example, let's take the cell for odds ratio. For any of these fields, if we were to right-click on the title and then select explanations, we could add one in. Also, you have the ability to edit the complete list of explanations across the entire Summary of Findings table. This can be done from the bottom of the screen through the Explanations button. By clicking on the button, a menu will rise. Each row in the menu corresponds to different explanations. At this point, in the creation of our Summary of Findings table, we only have 2. The GDT orders explanations in the order that they appear on the table. So, that is to say, if we were to add more explanations later in our creation of our Summary of Findings table, the order of these will change. For instance, what is currently number 2 now may be number 6 or 7 later, depending on how many total explanations we have. When you roll over an explanation, you can see which cell it corresponds to in the Summary of Findings table. In this case, it corresponds to the quality of evidence here. If you would like to edit an explanation, choose the edit icon to the right of the title. Here you can make any edits and then select Save. Now, back to our dichotomous outcome. The information of our dichotomous outcome is complete. Just to point out that the GRADEpro Handbook and Help are always available to you. As noted before, you can access help for any particular field by clicking on a cell and right-clicking on the name and then selecting Help. Alternatively, you can go to the top right-hand corner of the screen and click on the question mark icon. From here, you can access the GRADEpro Handbook. The help file and the handbook are quite extensive. In the Summary of Finding Table section, you will notice that there is a section for grading quality. You will see that it goes through all of the grade domains and detailed descriptions. Now I will fill in the information for a continuous outcome. I will enter in the information for the Borg score outcome, which is shown here. The name of the outcome is not very clear, and most importantly, there is no information about the scale. So I will click on the cell and change the name to dyspnea or shortness of breath. Now I will change how it was assessed. In this case, I can type in Borg scale. I will also enter in the range of follow-up, which was 3 to 6 months. Furthermore, I will enter in the range of possible scores. The Borg score goes from 0 to 10, with 10 being worse. Basically, I have just filled in a bit more information to help people understand this outcome a bit better. Now I can see what was imported from the RevMan file from the meta-analysis. This can be seen here. Let's have a look at our meta-analysis. The mean difference was 0.53, with confidence intervals of 0.96 to 0.1. There were 2 studies, and in total, there were 66 plus 77 people in the studies, for a total of 144. So now back to GRADEpro. You can see these numbers were added in here. What I need to do is enter in the type of studies, as I did for the dichotomous outcome. So we will click on the cell and once again choose randomized control trials. Again, these are typical for most Cochrane reviews. Once I have selected, I can then click Apply. So the mean difference went into the cell for the risk with self-management, and this is fine. No changes needed. As an author, you need to decide what baseline scores to choose. Right now, it shows 0. This is not correct. Typically, the summary of findings table should show a range of baseline scores, and I need to enter this manually. I can go to the forest plot, and I can see from the studies that in the usual care group, the score ranged from 1 to 4. So I will use this as my range. If I had a baseline score from a large representative non-randomized studies, I could use that instead. So I'll go back to GRADEpro, click on the usual care cell, and then enter a range of 1 to 4. For a continuous outcome, I do not need to identify these as low or high risk groups. That is because we do not need to calculate separate absolute values for each baseline risk, as we did for the dichotomous outcomes. I could add an explanation of where these numbers came from by right-clicking on the score and selecting explanations, and then adding it and typing it in. But this came from the studies, so I will not add an explanation. There are no units for the Borg scale, so I will leave this cell empty. But if my outcome was weight, for example, I could enter in kilograms or pounds here. If it was height, I could enter in centimeters. For now, I am happy with my selection, so I will click Apply. I will now need to fill in the quality of evidence using the same process that I used for the dichotomous outcome. As previously explained, I will click whether there is no serious, serious, or very serious concern for each of the grade outcomes. Should I provide serious or very serious concern, I will need to provide an explanation for each of the grade domains. For risk of bias, there was serious concern, so I will right-click on the title, select Explanations, and because I have a new explanation that has not been put into any of the other cells in the Summary of Findings table, I can click Add Explanation and put in my specific text. Once the text has been added, I can select Save and then close the menu. Moving on, for inconsistency, there was no serious concern. There was also no serious concern for indirectness. However, for imprecision, there was serious concern. So once again, I will have to create a new explanation. In this case, I will say that there are few events or participants. I can then select Save. Moving on, there was little concern of publication bias. You can now see that all values have been entered, so I can select Apply. You will also notice that a low quality of evidence has been entered, as there were 2 concerns across 2 domains. Now my continuous outcome is complete. As was illustrated before, another scenario is when you want to include an important outcome, but there was no meta-analysis, and so the outcome was not automatically pulled in from the RevMan file. In this case, I want to report the number of exacerbations. Remember, we had started to add this outcome earlier on in the video. This outcome was not pooled in a meta-analysis in my review, but it was recorded in some of the included studies. As shown previously, I started to add this outcome by selecting Add Outcome, clicking Narrative, and then filling in some of the remaining information. In this case, because I've already started the outcome, I will select Delete instead of selecting Save. For now, I need to fill in the details for the rest of this narrative outcome. From the text of the review, I know that there were 3 studies, and that these were randomized trials. 296 people were in the intervention group, and a total of 295 were in the control group. Over to the left, I can describe the outcome a little bit better in this cell. In order to do this, I will enter this text. Studies showed inconsistent effects, an increase and also reduction in the number of exacerbations with self-management programs. After entering the text, I can select Apply. I will still have to assess the quality of evidence using the same process as for the dichotomous outcome. As explained previously, I will select whether there is no serious, serious, or very serious concern within each domain, and then add in the explanations to explain my judgments to the readers. For risk of bias, there was serious concern. When adding our explanations, one of our previous explanations that we have already used can be used in this case as well, so we will select it. We will also need to add a new explanation. In this case, we will say that there was selective outcome reporting. We are now done with this domain, so we can click Save here and then Exit. Moving on to inconsistency, it was serious as well. So when adding an explanation, we will have to add a new one and say that results were inconsistent across studies. We will skip indirectness and move down to imprecision. In this case, it was serious as well, and when we add an explanation, we can use our previous explanation of few events or participants. Now, going back a step, all of our other domains had no concern. We can now select Apply. As you can see, a very low quality of evidence has been entered, as we had 3 concerns across 3 grade domains. Our narrative outcome is now complete. For the rest of the table, I will go through each outcome and fix numbers and assess the quality of evidence, adding in explanations as necessary. For now, I've jumped ahead to the completed table. As you can see, there are no empty cells. Now that I have gone over my table to make sure that there are no empty cells, I'm ready to export it. I can export by selecting this icon with the arrow on the top right-hand corner of the screen. After clicking it, I will choose which outcomes I want to export. In this case, I will select all. I will then select SOF file, which is necessary in order to be imported into RevMan later. After doing this, I'm ready to download my file. I will put it into my file of my own selection. If you are using Google Chrome and you have set it up appropriately, you should be able to see your file downloaded at the bottom of the screen. Otherwise, you will need to be aware of which file you're putting it into. Now I am done with GRADEpro GDT and I'm ready to move into RevMan. Now I am in RevMan and want to import my SOF file, but first I have to open a review file. As you can see, I am on the opening screen of RevMan, so I will click Open a Review from File. In this case, I have a review on my desktop screen, so I will select it and then click Open. Once on the screen, you want to go to Tables, Summary of Findings Tables, and then click Add Summary of Findings Table. This is where you can add your new SOF file. In this case, you want to import because you already have an SOF file created. So click this button and then select Next. You will be given the option to open your SOF file from a folder which you originally saved it in. In this case, I have it pre-selected to go to my desktop folder, but you may want to go through your computer to find it. So I will select my file and then click Open. As you can see, there's a brief preview of the table. I can tell that this is what I want to import, so I will select Finish. Now that the file has been imported, you should take a look at it to ensure that you are happy with it. If you notice a small text change, you are able to make edits in the RevMan file by highlighting and adding or deleting. However, despite this, we highly recommend making edits directly in the GRADEpro GDT and then importing the table again. You will likely need to change the table after peer review, and it is difficult to keep track of the edits you made in RevMan or GRADEpro. More importantly, if any changes are made to the numbers, RevMan will not do the calculations that GRADEpro GDT does automatically. Note that the GRADEpro GDT will save all of your work online on our secure servers. This is similar to how RevMan saves your review on the Archie server, which you can access at any time. GRADEpro GDT can also be used offline by bookmarking any page while you are in GRADEpro. Also, if you would like more information, there are a variety of websites with additional modules and information. You can also contact us at support@gradepro.org.